Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of our podcast for Making Connections, a handbook for effective formal mentoring programs in academia. I am here today with Dawn Chanlin, who is the author of Chapter 20, Networked Mentoring Programs in Academia. I am so excited to have this conversation because I've been talking about different forms of mentoring and particularly this idea of networked mentoring. So we are here with an incredible expert because Dr. Dawn Chanlin is a professor of management and organizational behavior at the McColl School of Business at Queen's University in Charlotte. She has over 30 years of business, consulting, coaching, and academics experience, and 12 teaching and research awards since the beginning of her academic career. Her research contributions have centered on mentoring and coaching and have been featured in several popular press outlets, including but not limited to the Wall Street Journal, New York Times, Los Angeles Times, Forbes, AOL, Career Builder, and MSN. So Dawn is prolific and has published in top academic journals as well, including the Journal of Management, Journal of Organizational Behavior, Vocational Behavior, and Career Development International. So hello, Dawn, welcome. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for the warm welcome. And I'm just so happy to be part of the conversation. I love mentoring.
Thank you so much. And I mean, an impressive bio, a clear passion for mentoring. So share with us what has inspired your work in mentoring, and then particularly what inspired this particular chapter on networked programs.
Yes. Okay. Well, I will actually tell you a story for me or for the audience. That I think would be of interest. I kicked off my doctoral program in management at Boston University in 2001, and I was completely overwhelmed. I had 4 classes, and in one alone, I had 600 pages of reading. And I had come from a job in business and thought, I'm going to drop out because I don't know that I can handle the learning curve. It was philosophy of science. It was just very new to me. And so here I was thinking I was going to leave an academic setting. And what did I do? I got exceptionally once in a lifetime lucky. I ended up going into the office of a woman named Kathy Cram, who is probably the world's leading scholar on mentoring, and she resides at Boston U. And I said, Kathy, I know your work. I've read some of your papers. I really like mentoring, coaching, adult development, and I am not doing well, and I need some help. Can you help me? And she said, you know what? Nobody's asked me for this kind of support in a little while directly. I'm happy to help. And so we set up an independent study, and she became my mentor for the next 5 years while I was in my doctoral program. And I ended up going from languishing to, I would dare say, thriving, and had a very good career in publication. And it was really all because of her mentorship. And she is the one who classically wrote about mentoring and what it means, the psychosocial and career functions. And she delivered all of those to me over 5 years. I could go endlessly into stories about her, introducing me to senior people in the field like Monica Higgins. And I mentioned Monica Higgins because she and Monica were the first people to write about the mentoring network concept, and it ended up in a top journal. So it was mentoring that kind of changed my career. And so I fell in love with it because it mattered so much to me. And that's what I've been writing about ever since.
That's phenomenal. And it does just truly speak to the power of mentoring and how, and also which gets talked about in earlier chapters, of that self-directedness, right? And of seeking help, asking for help. And so often folks are so fearful to ask for help, but when we do, you get help, right? People want to help.
Yeah, I did my dissertation on, I examined people who were outstanding with mentoring networks. And for somebody watching, that is essentially, they call it an egocentric network, where you or I would have a network of support. Some people call it like a board of advisors, some people call it a developmental network. And that it reflects really this idea that whereas we used to think of mentoring as like a single Yoda figure or Mr. Miyagi, maybe that never really happened anyway, although Kathy was mine for sure. We really probably always drew on multiple sources of support as individuals. So to your comment, I compared people who were identified as outstanding with nurturing, mentoring, relationships, and support networks from people who were just average at that. And to your comment, one thing that I came to conclude is that people who are outstanding with mentoring assume that most people do want to help you. They just can only do it for only a chunk of time. But that belief is what causes them to reach out and ask for help in the first place. That was among some of the findings.
Yeah, yeah, and thank you for that, because it certainly has been in my experience, right, in the work that I do. I always tell people, they said, well, you do these big events with mentors. Where do you find the mentors? Finding mentors is easy, right? Finding
That's
people
right.
who opt in for a mentoring experience is more challenging, has been my experience, than finding mentors, because people do want to help. People do want to share their expertise and experience, and that's so valuable. And I want to, just for a moment, to take a step back and kind of talk about, what does networked mentoring mean, and then what does it mean in the context of a formal environment? Because I think most people, if you were to go to a family dinner or sit around the office or whatever and chat with people and ask them to reflect on mentors that they have had, most will probably identify that kind of Yoda figure, that there was a parent, a coach, or
Yeah,
someone. But I think also people will say, well, I've had lots of mentors.
that's
Lots of
right.
people have been mentors. So how do we take this idea of an informal context, that throughout our life or our career, different people have influenced us, to something more formal, more structured?
Okay, sure. So I think I understand. So first of all, what I would actually urge people to focus on, and this gets to how one might create a networked program in an academic setting, right? Because I've helped a number of organizations, maybe many, to nurture formal mentoring programs where people are either matched with each other or there's some other concept in action. And I remember some of my earliest work was done with a company. I'll keep it nameless, but it's a large pharmaceutical company. Interestingly, it was Kathy Cram who introduced me, so that was part of her mentoring. And so the idea is that they were going to have a one-on-one mentoring program. And I said, hey, don't just do that, because you never know. That may be formal and last 6 months or a year, and then it may go away. But what you really need to do is train people to think about how to build their own networks. And so we started talking about, well, what are your growth needs? What do you need? Be it a confidant, someone to sponsor you at work. Do you need some individual coaching on something? And just think in terms of what are called mentoring episodes. And so it's actually Monica Higgins, I believe, who spawned that idea. And then people like Belrose Reagan, who's another highly cited global scholar, speak about it as well. So the idea is you just look for good people to have a conversation with you, whether it's 15 minutes or an hour. And to your point, ultimately that can move over time. If you have enough of them, what they say is there's a tipping point where you start to develop this sort of liking, rapport, and closeness, and that person becomes more invested in you, and you can call it a mentoring kind of situation. So you may never, quote, formalize it. Well, although you could. Actually, one of my best mentoring relationships was with someone who I taught about networks in class, and then wanted me to mentor her and asked if we could be a little bit more structured about it. So she invoked in me. I said, yes, I'm happy to help you. She wanted to get into a doctoral program for my field. And so I said, there's a lot we got to do. And she said, okay, well, in the spirit of what you taught us, how often can we meet? And let's set out some parameters on what we're hoping to get out of this. She kind of flipped the script, right? So I think more than anything is finding people based on your needs that you actually have, and reach out to them once. I could think one social scientist who's probably the best known social scientist right now, Adam Grant. He's written several best-selling books. And I remember when I was at Boston U, a number of my colleagues and I were at a conference and he walked by, and one of them, a friend of mine from Harvard, said, "He's amazing. What's he doing that everybody else isn't?" Because he's publishing all these in all these top journals. So I said, I want to find out. So I emailed Adam Grant. He responded within 24 hours and often offered to talk to me for an hour. He's not a mentor, but it was one of the most memorable conversations I've had. And to build into the idea of the chapter is just this idea that there are multiple variations on network mentoring. It could start with an individual's network of like a spouse, a friend from grad school, a friend at work, their faculty advisor at school, or it could be group mentorship. It could be that multiple, a faculty member or two are leading a group of 10 students. So it's just more in recognition that there's value in plurality beyond just a one-on-one relationship.
I love that. I think one of the things that I have done in my work of working with new leaders, leaders who are earlier in their career, is this idea. You said it, I wrote it down. Training people to create their own networks, I think is such a, like, it's a profound, it's a skill we don't think, or we assume people have, and can be underestimated. And I think one of the things you note in your chapter is how historically in higher ed that, you know, traditional dyads have certainly gotten more traction in terms of practice and research, but
That's right.
particularly within that context, how valuable developing the skill to create your own networks can be.
Yeah. And, you know, you might, there may be another question that's forthcoming, but maybe I'll just open the door to it around this, which is, and I would say the power of the book is already out there. We put in newsletters at the university, faculty highlights, and I mentioned this publication, and our dean of students emailed me and said, "I'm super interested in networks mentoring, and will you send me the chapter?" I did. P.S. She wrote to me, and we are in the process of developing a networked mentoring program here at Queens. So I'll open the door to that part of the dialogue, because, you know, they can flourish. They can be very smart. There are multiple ways to do it. So I'll pass it back off to you for the next question.
So let's talk about that, right? So let's talk about what that might look like if, you know, we have folks who are listening who have very successful traditional dyad mentoring programs. Why would they want to consider a networked version? And are they already doing it and maybe don't know it?
Oh, that's interesting. I think that that's very interesting. I like that theory, and maybe some universities are. However, what I say is, and probably the university could get a little bit better at it, right? If you just, they're more intentional about it and leverage what we know about designing good formal programs. But I like where you're going with that, because I think one, you know, mentoring is obviously is populated by faculty members, staff members who implicitly are helping people learn. So it's a perfect breeding ground for these kinds of programs. What I would say is, you're better off if you start to get very intentional about what you're doing. Because, for example, here at Queens, we have mentorship through like advising, but you can't guarantee that an advising relationship would go beyond, for example, hey, what are my classes going to be, right? So one could say, oh, well, we have kind of more mentoring, but it depends on how somebody goes about it at that point. So even just thinking about developing a program is really, what do you want out of it? What are your primary objectives? And so, for example, my colleague and I asked her, well, what do you really want out of this? And for her, she's really interested, for example, not surprisingly to people who might be on this podcast or listening to it, retention, right? And so retention, confidence, a little bit more around professional development and clarity of where somebody could contribute, bonding with other people. And, you know, you just can't be sure that one person can provide support commensurate with the needs that people have, because we get different satisfaction, I could call it, and or contributions from different types of people. I think my student might get something from me, maybe on professional development, self-confidence, but maybe they can get vulnerable with and have a confidant in their peer. So the key is to really start to figure out, what are you after? And then build out what is the right arrangement for you. So is it that one faculty member would lead a group of peers? Would you educate the peers to be each other's coaches? There is some burgeoning literature on peer coaching, and Kathy Cram, for example, wrote a couple of very good articles that somebody could access probably via Google Scholar. So you got to think about, well, what might a peer help with?
Right.
And teach them how to coach each other through asking good questions, through active listening, and realizing that when people come to us for support or come to us and engage us at any point, there's a reason. Is it that they have a problem and they need an ear, they have a self-confidence issue, there's an intractable or seemingly intractable problem ahead of them. So I would say, know why you're doing it. Realize that even a great advisor is very busy and probably has service, teaching, and research requirements. And even, staff, we can only provide so much help. So that's why give people the opportunity to have multiple sources of support around them. And then you figure out who are they and what can they bring, and how can you educate them to pair off or support their group of peers effectively.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because as folks read through the case studies, because this is what I have seen in quite a few case studies, is that as part of the mentoring activities, they're bringing all the mentors together to talk about their experience,
Right.
and they're bringing mentees. And so already built into some of the programs are some peer mentoring experiences that, and that's why I said kind of unknowingly, they've already sort of built in this idea of networked mentoring. But I think your point is so critical, that it's about being an intentional, and perhaps even in their own assessment and evaluation, they're not taking into account these broader relationships. And so I really like that idea of intentionality. And something else that really struck me when I was reading through your chapter that I think networked mentoring offers a solution for is this idea that others have shared in previous discussions and chapters, that very often different offices on campus may feel a little threatened by faculty mentoring students, because student affairs feels like it's their responsibility, student advisors feel like it's their responsibility. So in your chapter, you say, well, what if they had mentors who weren't just faculty, but from other aspects of the university? And I thought that was brilliant.
Yeah. Yes. And by the way, the network concept doesn't just pertain to students, although that might be the focus. You might develop as an administrator a networked program for first-time faculty, right? Or even first-time administrators, because everybody has different needs, which is another reason why it's important to think about, well, what are you after and what do they need to get out of the program? And you are correct. Part of that could be, it really depends on how far you want to go with it, right? You could actually design a program where maybe someone from student affairs or, student advising, an advisor, a faculty member, and someone in residence life, they all are a peer mentoring, or a mentoring group that is engaging a group of students. And you can figure out, like, do they all meet together? Does one mentor meet with each of them so they get their time with the residence life person in a mentoring capacity, then the faculty? So you could really design it so all of the quote mentors interface and come up together with, okay, here's the role that I'll play. You can just educate people on building their networks and helping them realize where they're going to get support. But it really just starts with, can we be intentional? In this case, just to give you an example, the dean of students is using a program on campus for students from underprivileged, we'll call them, socioeconomic backgrounds. And who we really want at the university and to teach them to thrive or help them thrive. And so what she decided is this is the perfect group to start this networked mentoring concept with. So she is going to have me act in one particular capacity as like an informal mentor. And then there are 3 faculty members who are already part of that. And so we're going to design this networked mentoring program around the 4 of us plus her in some capacity. So you could imagine maybe you have like, my view is with group or networked mentoring, you're probably better not going beyond maybe like 5 to 7 students, because at that point, it's harder for mentors to touch each person psychologically, socio-emotionally. And so start with smaller groups and figure out who's going to play what role. In this particular case, we're going to have it probably be a year-long program, and the 3 faculty members will have groups of 5 to 7 people that they'll meet with in groups to help with acclimating to campus, learning what on-campus resources there are, and I'm going to lead certain sessions on professional development, which we also know can support retention. And the goal is to also build in with the networked mentoring approach some degree of social element so that they bond with each other, because they may not remember us, but they may stay at Queens because they connected with each other and felt seen and recognized as human beings. So again, there are lots of variants. You just have to be smart, and you got to have the time to do it, right?
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah. No, thank you for that. And I know in the chapter, you do go into detail about the different types of networked approaches. So I hope folks go into the chapter and read through those and see the different ways, as you've just articulated, that it can be implemented. But I also want to note that in your chapter, you talk about the importance of universities building mentoring into the culture.
Yes. Absolutely. And so ideally, you will have a number of different ways that you will do that. But one really might well start from the top, right? If the senior leadership team decides it is serious about coaching and mentoring others in the university, and actually publicly pronounce that they want a mentoring and coaching culture, and be very public about who they are mentoring, and then sharing stories of those successes between them, what they're learning from each other, and then designing some of these arrangements around people, be it faculty members or staff, students, and really taking almost like an organizational change lens where you really think about what's your vision for how would you know a mentoring or coaching culture if you saw it? What would be the indicators? How do you communicate what you're after? Then empower people through these sort of networked mentoring approaches, and communicate progress and wins. And by the way, one that I would also just trigger as an example, because as I said, there are so many variants for different populations. Another one of the most rewarding mentoring experiences I had is when a group of staff and I decided to have a mentoring group. And that is one type of where you are peers and you are equally engaging each other within a group context. So we would talk about, we would meet for an hour every couple weeks, and we would talk about, what's one thing that you're grappling with? And we set the rules and said, this will always be a safe space. We're not talking about this beyond the time that we, are together. And it was very enriching. And none of them are with the university any longer, but it was very memorable. So, I mean, for one, it's just for a mentoring culture, just push people to think about helping each other and see and reward it when you see it. So you could almost see like a newsletter, a mentoring newsletter come out every month where it describes success stories and what people are doing to help each other.
Yeah, I love that. And I thank you for sharing that, because I know in one of my earlier conversations that I had with some leadership, about this. I think it's so it coming from the top is really important, and really thinking about it in a holistic way, in terms of the entire university, and really aligning with, and I think that's the name of the chapter. I'm trying to find it here. That it's actually was James Taylor and Greg Dart in chapter 6, who talked about securing institutional support and an organizational alignment. And if your organization truly values its staff, its faculty, and its students, then this should be kind of a no-brainer, right? That we're building in this kind of learning culture.
Well, you're right. And candidly, it can be a differentiator for the school, right? If you really wanted to go there, it's beneficial for current students, but it could also be a way to attract students. If you can decide that's going to be part of our marketing program, and if it's honest that you do mentoring better than others universities, because that's true empowerment in a university context.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. No, I think it's a really great point. And if that culture doesn't exist, just as any sort of culture shaping initiative, you do have to look at it through that change lens, because you are asking everybody to shift the paradigm and adopt new behaviors.
Right.
And it's so key to sustainability. I always, as I've been having these conversations with folks, I can't help but think of, that one staff member or that one faculty member who's been asked to do this monumental task of implementing some mentoring, and has put a lot of work and energy for it to not progress, right?
Sure.
And that just breaks my heart. But I think, to your point, I know when I look back at my career, I had a peer mentoring group. We called ourselves a mastermind, but we met every week. We had a real clear structure of supporting each other with business challenges. And it was such a powerful and important group in helping each of us problem solve and troubleshoot challenges we were having in building and growing our businesses. So it can be really powerful to have those groups, those networks that we're building out. So I want to take us kind of bring us conversation to a close, but I want to make sure that as we close this conversation, that we're supporting people who may, for the first time, be implementing a program or starting to plan out or getting some buy-in, and they're now thinking, okay, I've made it to chapter 20, and now I want to really start thinking about creating a networked program. So if I'm thinking about creating a networked program, what is something that I must have as part of that program?
Yeah. Well, you ideally want some sort of volunteerism. We do know it. So to get a little bit broad in this, we do know there's actually pretty robust literature on what makes formal mentoring programs better. And so things like, you don't want to force faculty members or staff to do it. You ideally want to seek out volunteers, or candidly, people who are somehow incentivized to support the group that you're thinking about. Because we know from volunteerism comes usually commitment. You ideally would have, this is not a must, but it would be nice if you had some degree of matching in the program. So you could do some sort of intake on, what people's needs are and aspirations, depending on what you are after, and then try to figure out who might have similar styles or complementary capabilities. One thing that I personally would say is a huge must is training everybody. So train the proteges on how to seek out support, because sometimes what happen is you get these very well-intended people together for these programs, but they don't know what to talk about. And, or the protege gets nervous and thinks, do I reach out to, say, a student? Do I reach out, or does my mentor reach out? And then nothing happens and everybody gets disillusioned. So get them together and say, here's what mentoring looks like, and here's what you should expect. And in the immediate, it's not necessarily that they're going to go out and help you find a job, if it's the case of a student, but you could anticipate coaching, someone who will affirm your identity. In the case of a student, be a confidant. And, so let them understand expectations, help them, I would say in both cases, learn how to ask, quote, powerful questions. And so you might have, some degree of coaching, building capabilities or competency building for the mentor, and arm the proteges with questions that they can ask mentors. And you could literally find hundreds online just out there, you could envision a student asking a business leader, if you brought in a business leader, can you just tell me about how, some key moment of adversity in your career or something you learned that you've never forgotten. So I think it's really helping them learn to connect through questions and encourage them to be vulnerable and open. Ideally, if you really want one that's going to be effective, you probably want to have at least some degree of post-test effectiveness. So you might reach out to a few of the mentoring groups, if you will. It all depends on the arrangement, to say privately, how's this going for you, right? What's working? What might we do? And then you could do a formalized survey to say, tell me how else we can help you. How effective is this for you? And get the feedback. Because, like, for example, we're going to do a test pilot just to see how does this arrangement work. And then at the end, we're going to get a bunch of feedback to figure out what worked. And then my colleague, the Dean of Students, is thinking of scaling this more broadly to different student groups. But again, you could do that for faculty mentorship, where maybe, like when I came aboard at Queens, I was assigned 2 other female mentors who were seasoned academics, and they were my mentors for the first 3 months of Queens to help acclimate me to the culture, make me feel seen, make me bond. So I would say, again, ideally volunteerism. I would say, Ashley, also the must is have your purposes in mind. So you build it in and do that reverse design. So begin with the end in mind and then work backwards. Some degree of training, ideally, if possible, some degree of matching. It's not a must, but it's nice to have. And then some degree of post-test. I think if I were doing it at a university setting beyond what we're doing, I would test it first and then learn from it and then scaffold it in some capacity.
That's fantastic. That's fantastic. So what could we live without?
It is a good question. I would say, well, here's another thing that I would say. I always would advise train people to go out and build their own networks, right? And I have done that with campus groups where I come in with a group of students who just came to Queens, because if it doesn't work out with one formal mentor, they may get disillusioned and have no support. But if you arm them with knowledge, they can do it. So that's a must. I think in terms of what they can do without, I actually don't think I think some people believe you have to be very similar. And I do think that, diverse and diversified connections can work well when people are encouraged to open up about their worlds and how their differences might lead them to interact and have different experiences in the world. And then be open and curious and affirmative about people's identities and what they're experiencing. And know you're going to have blind spots in either direction, probably, no matter where you sit. So there's a degree of curiosity. So I would say I think people can actually be quite different, but they have to learn to be open and curious, and interested and open-minded. So I think that piece I would say you could do without. And I think that's probably the one thing that I can think of.
Okay. Yeah, no, I think that's great. And I think it's helpful, right? Because it can be so overwhelming to try to hit all the pieces. And so knowing what is crucial and maybe we, can redirect our energy into the things that are the most important. I certainly know that this chapter inspired me. It gave me some more language to think about this networked mentoring programs. And so I want to thank you so much, Dawn, for your contribution to the book, the contribution you have made to the field in general. Your scholarship is so valued and appreciated. And thank you so much for today's conversation.
Thank you so much. I appreciate this opportunity. It was an honor and I enjoyed meeting you as well.
All right. Thank you so much. And thank you, everyone. I look forward to seeing you in our next episode where we look at some of the case studies in chapter 20. So thank you all for listening and watching today. Bye-bye.